Hello, welcome to the latest episode of Through the Pages. Today I have some plant-based goodness for you with the China Study by Colin Campbell. If you're plant-based, you've probably heard this book or study referenced, and rightfully so. So I've read his other two books, and along with kind of telling you about this book, I want to tell you a little bit how it corresponds or it kind of falls in line with these books here, or what his bibliography sort of encapsulates here. So the China Study is, in my opinion, his seminal work. I love all three of his books for three different reasons. The China Study is kind of broken into four parts. So the first part is going over the namesake, the China Study, which is the largest nutritional study ever conducted. It was on thousands of people over, I think, 27 years across China, from rural to urban that has been westernized. And it was just such a breadth of data that it was one of the first kind of irrefutable landmark pieces of clinical research for plant-based diets or an alternative to such a high meat consumption that we're used to in the West. And it was one of those things, kind of like as you go into anything that you've already kind of learned about, where the China Study is what everything references. Like, it's the OG of research. And so I wasn't so excited to read about that for some reason. I kind of kept putting this book off, honestly. I was so wrong about it. I mean, yes, it kind of confirmed certain things, but the way he spelled it out in the foundation that it led for the rest of the book really made the whole book was fantastic. I honestly just thought it was going to be 300 pages on the China Study specifically. And to that point, I would have, at probably about 150, 200 pages, been like, I'm good, got it. But it was so much more than that. And it's from about 20 years ago, so there's some bits in it that are written better or better articulated in his later works. But this book overall encapsulates everything that a plant-based eater should be looking at. This is the book I would honestly recommend. There are so many out there, and I've read a fraction of a fraction, but they all have their own particular slants, kind of like what his other books do. Eating Animals was one of my first ones by Jonathan Safran Foer, which was really not even about personal health at all. It was just animal agriculture and just diving into that. And this does not do that at all. He even remarks, that he's not unanimously loved by vegans because he does use animal studies, because he believes that furthers science so much faster than doing it without could, that the overall benefit to humanity and earthlings is outweighed. I agree with him there. I'm in certain ways not the typical vegan, and I eat honey, bad person. Yeah, so there's some super strict vegan things that can kind of get a little bit illogical to me. But this book brings all the logic into the plant-based diet. So after the China Study section kind of gets into what diseases come from our standard American way of eating. And one that I really enjoyed his take on was osteoporosis. It's something that I've been fascinated to learn more about. I was someone who drank more milk than any person I've ever known. I was not super into cheese. That's one area where I'm not consuming a lot, where I know other people, their overall milk consumption is high, but it's due to cheese. I just drank a shitload of milk. I remember even right up until I went plant-based vegetarian, I would have a big thing of milk at work. Working in the warehouse and be it's liquid vitamins, this shit's so good. And it's yikes. So it really dives into not just heart disease, but a few specific cancers, blindness, and just doesn't go into all the diseases out there that connect to nutrition, which would be basically everything, but just a few in particular ones. And I won't dive too deep into my favorite parts on the book because I feel like it kind of takes steam out of it a little bit, but the osteoporosis one is one that I've always found fascinating ever since I've kind of learned what that disease truly is, where I think we all kind of grow up with like, it's a lack of calcium. Take more calcium into your body, that'll help. Data doesn't really prove that. The only countries that have higher rates of osteoporosis than us are ones that have higher dairy consumption. We are pretty high on the list. We're not the highest, surprisingly. Again, cheese would be the big factor there, not just like everyone's sitting around drinking milk socially like it's Clockwork Orange, but it's mostly in a little bit more refined way, but where America, it's in all the products, it's ice cream, it's kind of just weaved into everything, creams, everything. And so osteoporosis, as he explains it, also my understanding of it from multiple sources, multiple eras, you know, this is 20 years old, still holds up. Like, that's where I kind of like getting books that are varied in that way. But so osteoporosis, usually we're going to think cow's milk. That's going to be your ticket out of it, or your kind of safeguard for it. And I recently have kind of considered cow's milk to be the Trojan horse of healing for osteoporosis, where it appears to be a great calcium supplement. So we're like, yes. The downside is it's heavy on animal proteins, which when we take in too much of them, require calcium to counter the acidic environment that it causes. So animal products just build up a lot of uric acid in the body, and this can be a powerful base, this calcium, but it's not the calcium that comes in with the milk at the same time. That isn't the type of calcium that can kind of rectify this. It's the calcium that comes out of our bones into that. So when you see a rise in animal proteins, you will generally see a rise of calcium in the urine, and he has a lot of sources on that. So not only is he a phenomenal writer, but he's a doctor. And sometimes I would cringe if someone said that, well, a doctor said it. Like, what doctor? But, you know, like, so I only say it just because he's been in the clinical research. He's run peer-reviewed studies. He's been in this for decades, was in decades at this time. Now he's even further on in his other books. But, so, running studies, seeing that, yep, as the animal proteins go up, so does the calcium in the urine, meaning that as we're taking in milk thinking, I did it, you're making the problem worse. And that is why we're so high in osteoporosis. What we think is the solution is a cause. There's a lot in this book that kind of gets to things like that. And some of it's more apparent. Like I said, heart disease, no one's shocked that eat a ton of meat compared to a plant-based diet, one's going to have more heart disease. Not shocking. But there's a lot in here that is eye-opening, and the way that it's displayed and the carefulness with which it has been researched, I won't say makes it irrefutable, because I know there's always another side of the story, and there are some aspects in this where I would want to question, is it factory farm meat, or would the study have come out the same if it were grass-fed beef or whatever it may be, you know, where most of the time when meat is discussed, it's using meat that is the 95+% factory farm meat. So there's times when that makes sense to me, because it is the majority, and it's saying, hey, you're probably going to end up with heart disease if you're eating this stuff. Because most people don't go to the store and think, if I'm going to eat meat, it's got to be this type. Most people aren't going that hard on it, so it makes sense that the studies don't. But as we move forward in this plant-based or carnivore thing, it really has to be conducted in the best of both. So while carnivores can say, look at that Impossible Burger, look at all the list of ingredients in it, all the bizarre shit, like, I'm with you. Like, the vegan processed foods are junk. They're a stepping stone off of that lifestyle onto this, onto whole food plant-based. But our side also has some issues, our side being the plant-based folks, that so much of what's out there is chemical sprayed and stuff. So I will say that while I questioned whether some parts were grass-fed or if it was organic meat, he also didn't really talk about it being organic produce a lot. He didn't really set that bar that if you're going to grocery shop, not only is it go plant-based, but some of those plant-based aren't good. You have to specifically do this. So it was more in the general, which is good in a way because it shows overall what most people are going to be accessing. This is how that shakes out. But like I said, going forward, as it's getting more contentious and we want to get better understanding of, is it good to exclude animal products completely, or should some be included? If you have even less than 10% animal, calories from animal products, protein from animal, however you want to quantify it, would you be better off had that been 0? Only using organic whole food plant-based versus organic grass-fed meat and dairy with plants. There's, in my opinion, 0 argument for the straight carnivore diet, the meat-only thing. I've seen people go down it and their skin looks like they've been dead for some years, huge bags under their eye, there's nothing to feed your microbiome. So the small trend of heavy carnivore diet, or like being jazzed on like, I barely eat any meat, I'll have maybe a little bit like of just some greens, but I'm really just all meat. Like I've seen people do that, podcasters, and it's just like, yeah, that's whack. That's on a microbial sense, you're killing yourself. And so that's something where I say about this book being like slightly dated, is that the word microbiome wasn't really even like around. So like this doesn't take into account the microbial aspect of everything, which is almost good, because then the book could be 500 pages and less approachable for people, where this is a pretty easy thing. And nutrition tethers to so many things, it's like, where do you stop? So it's probably for the best that he was able to condense it into this, because after going into the diseases that can come from it, he does have some nutrition guide in there a little bit, just kind of not like the kind of boring diet booky thing of like, this is what to eat, but of, if you stay within these guidelines given to us by the government or these food organizations, you could still eat this list of foods and be, I'm good, I'm following this, but look at that list and be like, obviously that's junk food. So he kind of gets into the reductionist view of like, you just have to hit these markers and that's complete. It's like, there's so much more to food. And that's kind of where his second book comes into the mix, whole. And so you'll hear him say this word in that book a ton. Whole. Holistic, spelled with a W sometimes. This is to say that it's the myriad of nutrients in a plant that make it so foundational to our health. It's not just that oranges have vitamin C, and if you're not into oranges, just take a vitamin C tablet. Vitamin C is vitamin C. It's not about isolating these individual factors from foods. It's about the whole thing, and what, after generation of generation of generation of these plants have grown to have along with each other. Like, there's nutrients in the plant that help you absorb other nutrients in the plant. So it's not about isolating things. It's not about just figuring what is the nutrient we need to get and check the box. So we do half a Brazil nut today for the selenium. Like, it's not about hitting these like individual isolated markers. It's about the whole thing. And so he really gets into that a lot in his discussion of the kind of nutritional approach to things, and past studies that had come out that were structured in a way where the results were only going to come out one way, and then those being touted as like the end all be all. And so that it kind of sieges into the fourth part, which is all about just the industry, and not necessarily like animal agriculture. He's not talking about Tyson. He's talking about the medical industry. And a lot of these like big organizations that get the acronyms that make them seem like, oh, that's irrefutable stuff, the National Institute of the, and all these varying things. But then digging into them, his experience working with them, being ousted from them because he started to say things that could have been against animal agriculture, and they're like, yeah, that's where our funding comes from. You're not going to mess this up. So it was very fascinating to read that story. If you like that sort of thing and are curious about more of it. That is the girth of what his most recent book, The Future of Nutrition, is about. And so I feel like it made sense these came out in this order. So the China study being you know what, I'm going to talk about plant-based diets. I'm going to talk about them because people have for centuries. I'm going to talk about the research we're finding that is peer-reviewed, conclusive, not set up in some bullshit framework, sieging into the benefits of those plants beyond what we can even imagine at this point. Like, there's so much good to plants that, like, we can't even quantify how good one healthy meal is for you. You can't just have blood work after and say, like, look, well, those vitamins are up. That's what that did. Like, it does a ton. It does so many things for our body. But what I imagine will be his last book, just because he's kind of getting up there in age, was his fuck the industry book, honestly. Like, you're not going to get to be part of certain conferences after this one. And that's for the good of everyone else. You know, maybe that hurts their profits or their reputation, but I think we know the American medical system has to shift. And it comes from people who have been within it speaking out about the dysfunction within it. And so through these 3 books, the education that he's put out into the world, into my head, been just foundational. Like, one of the best, writers on plant-based nutrition that I've come across. I know there's some that have more books than him, maybe more followers, all that type of stuff. Some of those tend to lead towards certain diet programs or, like, you know, starch solution and these sort of things that all of a sudden kind of like box it in, and it's that person's program. Where he kind of even speaks out about, like, fad diet books and stuff, which I really like, because that culture is just not so good. But he does a great job of rolling this out in a way that does not make the reader feel a lot of guilt. And that's, I recognize I'm over the hump at this point reading it, but still I think had I not gotten into plant-based yet and read this book, I don't think I would have felt bad about myself through reading it. Where sometimes, maybe more so with documentaries, they can be heavy-hitting or want to kind of swing a big stick in sort of the modern way where we see, like, politicians wanting to own the other one, or like, oh, this person just ripped this person, where you kind of want to throw punches, and they can be impactful or be like, fuck, I just cannot forget about that line, you know, and maybe it doesn't make me feel good, but it's sticking. And so there's some of that where he sidesteps that in a big way, and I think that's why not necessarily the China study itself, but the China study, the book, has stood the test of time. Like, this is probably one of the most widely read books about plant-based diets out there, and rightfully so. So, no surprise here, but I would recommend this book highly to any human. Like, this is the big one. Like, for like Future of Nutrition, I feel like you would already have to be kind of into this way of thinking a little bit, but whole is fascinating if you're just into science. Like, straight up, like, even if you don't plan on changing, like, plants just do amazing things. Like, that's the general general bit on that. And that, like, I can see how some people wouldn't, because they maybe don't have that curiosity. I was also, like, not into science as a youngster going through school. Like, that was historically my worst classes. But this book, The China Study, I feel like it kind of reminds us that we're part of humanity, not America. You know, there's a bigger group we're a part of, and kind of seeing what's happening over there, what's happening here, what they're doing over here, how that's affecting us, like, all that stuff makes it a lot easier to comprehend, rather than, like, just in America, in our sect here, like, we aren't representative of the world. You know, like, there's a varying degree of diet and health out there, and when you start to see that and the way trends are happening internationally, you start to recognize that domestically we're kind of off the path a little bit, and this is something kind of help nudge us back towards where I think we should be. So, home run after home run after home run for T. Colin Campbell in my book. If you're not a reader, thanks for watching this channel anyways, but watch Forks Over Knives. That's him and Dr. Caldwell Esselson's documentary that kind of sums up these. There's a couple things in there that I, don't completely agree with. Some of the things on fats are dicey, but I will say in this, he better explains the things on fats, and I think I mentioned that in Future of Nutrition as well, where sometimes in Forks Over Knives it was a little simplistic, like someone had pulled out some almonds, and this might have been in the little like follow-up thing where they were teaching people how to eat, but they're like, handful of almonds. He's like, you know how much fat that is? And it's like, it's almonds, dude. That's good fat. So yeah, phenomenal book. It's good nonfiction when you're like at work, like, oh, I wonder if I could get home a little early and get like 3 chapters in. Like, I was digging this book, and I hope you do too.